diving into advanced authentication and talking about what you may or may not be hearing from folks, just to clarify any issues, and I imagine that's going to be probably a hot topic for all of us to talk about. Any questions that came up that you thought about during lunch before we get started? Anything you saw? Several of you came up and asked us questions. Okay, we're going to skip that. I changed the times. We're going to go as fast as we can, but still give you as much content as we can, and then we'll go home. So in terms of advanced authentication, these were just some slides that we pulled together around what the policy actually requires, that each person who is authorized to store, process, or transmit CJI is uniquely identified, and it goes on and talks about this. I doubt there's much question about what that actually means. Where the question is going to come is around this advanced authentication piece. Now, I grabbed the language directly from the policy so that you could see it. This is horrible trying to read up here, Josh. It says AA provides for additional security in addition to the typical user ID and authentication for login ID and password. And they give you options. So biometrics, user-based PKI, smart cards, software tokens, hardware tokens, paper tokens, or wrist-based authentication that have some sort of software element, token element in it. We wrote some questions, but we want your questions as well. And one question we wanted to make sure was really clear, and I probably should let the SBI or DOJ or somebody else say this, but the question is, are there approved AA vendors that have been approved by the SBI or the FBI? I don't know where my handheld mic went. You want me to answer? No! The answer is no. No vendor is approved by the FBI or the SBI. If they are telling you they're approved, they are being liberal with what their approval actually is. Scenarios are approved at the local agency level. And that's really going to be important. And worst case scenario, I actually have several of the scenarios downloaded on my machine, and we can pull those up. But if Joel Hartley, who's here, submits to these gentlemen up here a scenario, and it has a network diagram, and it walks through step by step how the officers would do advanced authentication, then that approval, and Joel, I can't remember what yours is it RSA? Yes. RSA tokens, so it's RSA tokens. So the approval is for Joel Hartley's Davidson County deployment using RSA. It does not mean RSA has approval, blanket approval, it's just for that particular instance. And the best way to explain this is not a particular conversation about any given vendor, but we had an approval that came in for a vendor when it was diagrammed one way, and then the next person that submitted it, same vendor, but they submitted it with a diagram that was slightly different, where the authentication was happening at the device level, that was rejected. So it's really important to know that there is no vendor. Is that answering your question? Okay. So when they're coming to you saying that they have approvals, their scenarios have been approved at the local agency level. You should be submitting your scenarios for approval to the SBI DOJ. Brian Dickerson is actually the person to submit that to. It's B. Dickerson, DICKERSON at ncdoj.gov, right? Look at that. I have emailed him a lot lately. If you don't know his email, you don't want to write it down, you can always email it to me, and I will make sure that it gets to the SBI or the SBI and FBI. I copied Josh on all of them as well. So one of the other questions that came out, any questions on vendor approvals? Yes, sir.
When those come in, could they be shared with people so it won't work for somebody else?
This is a good question. So what we have tried to do for Nickel Giza, and I have no way to share with the law enforcement community unless y'all just want to adopt me and give me a gun and like a badge and a vest. No, you don't want to. Okay, great. But we don't have a listserv that we manage for law enforcement. I think these guys probably do. So what we've done is we've written a policy document that kind of highlights the efforts that we've done over the last 7 months. And we've been building into that policy document the approved scenarios with the network diagram and the description. So right now I've got a list, and I don't think it's complete, that I just wrote from the top of my head of everything that we know of that's been approved. And there's probably 10 in the state. I know New Hanover County has an approval, Davidson County has an approval, Kernersville has an approval, Chapel has an approval. Who else? Anybody else here have an approval that they've... Oh yeah, Gaston County, I had you written down. Gaston County has an approval. I tried to go through quickly and figure out. And so we're going to put all of that documentation together. I'm going to New Orleans tomorrow to teach, so I can't promise it's going to happen before I come back from New Orleans. But by next week, it will be on that link that we sent out with the cover sheet and all of the approved scenarios and diagrams. So that if you replicate exactly the way that it's already been approved, then it's fine, right? But if you deviate at all, it will not be necessarily accepted as approved. Questions around that? Any more questions around that? Okay, next question was, what options do we have for advanced authentication? Ray, I'm going to let you, I've got where I put all of the, So Ray has helped a lot of the local agencies figure out their authentication options. And you can look here and see some of the ways that it could be designed. And I know that there are places that have done it in a variety of these different ways, but Ray, if you don't mind talking about what options people have and maybe what we're seeing the most of in the local government space?
Certainly. So, for advanced authentication, I'd like to give an example of something that's not advanced authentication, because this comes up quite a bit. And very often you hear the term two-factor. The FBI chose to use the term advanced authentication to deviate from the industry standard of multi-factor or two-factor authentication, but essentially it's the same thing. But what it is not is using a username and password twice, meaning I log into my VPN with a username and password, and then I log into my mobile CAD with another username and password. That's just single-factor authentication used twice, which doesn't equal advanced or two-factor authentication. So, advanced authentication or multi-factor authentication is generally combining something that only you know, possess, something that you are, that you possess, with something that you know, essentially. So, it could be a key fob, hardware authenticator, which many of you are familiar with, and a PIN. That combined with your username would be an example of multi-factor or advanced authentication. It could be a certificate-based solution that might be using a certificate on an ID card or stored on a device like a laptop, a PIN. It could be,
Those paper tokens. I know Leonardville is using a paper token, right?
paper tokens would be another example of advanced authentication. There's something that's kind of developed over the past few years that's commercially available at a lower, I should say, a smaller organizational level, and that's called risk-based authentication. Now, risk-based authentication meets the criteria for advanced authentication. Most of you have already used this, and you may not be aware of it. When you connect to your online banking system of choice, you're using risk-based authentication in most of the cases. What does that mean? It means that some system that you connect to, a web portal, is profiling you. It's profiling your habits, it's profiling perhaps your devices, it's profiling your global IP, it's profiling your times of day you're connecting. And when you exceed a certain threshold, it might prompt you with questions that perhaps you answered during the enrollment process, like $50 name was, I picked a color, I graduated high school, and so on and so forth. More advanced risk-based authentication systems tie into databases where they might prompt you with a question like, which one of these 4 addresses did you live at in the 1980s? Or which one of these cars do you own? And so on and so forth. And that's kind of a industrial strength risk-based authentication solution that is generally fairly complex, involved in implementation, and expensive. However, during the last year or two, these types of solutions, which are approved as a method of authentication, are available for smaller implementations. So that's another example.
I think so. I think in terms of the local jurisdictions, what we're seeing the most of for rollouts, and maybe you guys can speak to this since you're approving the scenarios, my gut has been that they've been the the tokens, the software or hardware tokens for the most part. Is that a fair statement? Right, so that when I say that, let me give you some vendor names, and if there's vendors here, you want to holler out your vendor name, or if maybe you want to holler out the solution you have, that'd be great, because I didn't prepare vendor names, so I'm just not thinking off the top of my head. RSA, 2FA, Phone Factor is one that I know has been. Improbata. We have a approved scenario for Phone Factor, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I think someone here has a Phone Factor approval.
And I know Brad in Winterville, you're using Southern, is that who you're, no, you're using Allen, and they use a paper token solution that has been approved, I think. I don't know if it's been approved by these guys, but I know it's been approved in other places.
So getting back to these methods, you can use biometrics, which I didn't discuss, or Brian didn't cover that. So biometrics is acceptable. However, it has to be tied into a back-end system. Many of you have devices that come with a fingerprint reader, if you will, already integrated with the laptop, the PC. That by itself doesn't meet the criteria unless it's tied into a back-end system. That's something else.
So did everybody understand that the normal fingerprint biometric swipe that you have on your PC that it comes standard with is not sufficient for AA? Nothing that happens at the local device level is going to pass muster with these guys.
Now, it's not that you can't use that device that's provided by IBM, for example, with their ThinkPads, but it has to be tied into something in the background. Another option you have is proximity devices or RFID devices. If you have magnetic access badges, you can leverage those as part of your advanced authentication solution, but you have to have something in the back end that ties it all together. So it doesn't just happen, it's not you're just logging into that MDT or the laptop or MDC. It has to be a back end system. That's going to involve one of those vendors that just mentioned, plus probably another half dozen.
So that would apply to smart cards as well?
Smart cards, the question was, the smart cards meet the criteria. A smart card is typically a card that has a chip in it that contains certificates, for lack of a better term. It's generally how I see it deployed. And I think the answer is would you say, Ryan? Yeah, the answer would be yes. Smart cards would be acceptable. But again, if you're using a smart card system, it can't just be authenticating to the device. It has to be authenticating to something in the back end.
Does that make sense to everyone who's not an IT person about where it has to authenticate? Because we went toe-to-toe with the FBI, right, Josh? I don't know how many emails that took around that concept. It cannot, you have to be, essentially, in the world, many of you are living in with NetMotion. How many of you are using some sort of NetMotion type solution? Right? In the world of NetMotion, Ray, help me out here, because I'm going to get way technical over my head real fast. If you authenticate, if you try to do advanced authentication at the point that you log on to the machine and it doesn't ever go to the NetMotion server to authenticate, then you did not do the right kind of authentication. It would still be device-based.
That's correct. So as Shannon described, this has been a very long and iterative process that she's undertaken to help the SBI and the FBI for those initial scenarios that were developed. And if you kind of look at the policy, the way it's written, what's being done here in the state of North Carolina is really a deviation from the policy. The policy, as it's written, requires that you use advanced authentication with that mobile CAD application, would be one example. And that's not really possible right now because it's not supported natively by most of the mobile CAD vendors that are used in the state right now. So what this group up here has done is they've gotten the deviation approved from the FBI, and I think that's taken off and it's been well received. And at the end of the day, you're securing access to the data, which is really the goal. So I would encourage you to formulate any kind of questions or scenarios and pass them up to Brian and or Dr. Shannon, only so that it gets shared with the group as a whole. Thank you, Jesus. One of the things we discovered when we were first trying to develop these scenarios is that you couldn't just say, well, I'm using this here, I'm using this here, and this is how it works. They want the details. They want to understand the sequence of events, if you will, from when the individual, the officer out in the field, is going to start the process of connecting to the environment and launching the application and running that query. They want to understand where is the advanced authentication, what form are you using? Is it a token based, is it paper based, is it biometric based, is it a smart card certificate, what have you, or risk based? How does it tie into the back end? And how are you ensuring that individual is always going to be required to use it? So that sequence of events has to be described in the scenario. It's not as difficult as it sounds. It's typically 6 to 12 steps. You also want to include or make it clear or depict that you are using encryption in this transport. Because if you leave it out, it'll probably return to it, well, where's the encryption? Even though it's not really relevant to the whole advanced authentication piece, it's going to be looked for, at least at the FBI level. Now, Brian, you can improve these scenarios yourself, right? So, is that what you want to kind of speak with?
Sure. What the FBI wanted for us is for us to be also keyword compliant. So, also say that the encryption is just 140-2 certified. I don't know what it is, but go ahead and say it.
If you don't say it, and he has to send it to the FBI, they will reject the scenario. Even though I put it in the first time we sent it to them, I forgot it in the second time we wrote the exact same scenario, and they rejected it. So this is an example of an exchange. And we will, like I said, this is easily provided, and we'll put it out there, where we describe an actual flow process, and then we actually attach the network diagram stating exactly how it was going to work. They did not like it was generic, so it got kicked back because it was generic, because it has to be done by the local agency, essentially. I mean, you've got a couple of them through that were sort of hypothetical situations.
So if I can describe what we've done. So I talked about this deviation that was achieved. What this really is doing is, since most of your applications, most of the mobile CAD applications don't natively support any type of advanced authentication, and that's kind of another discussion, but just the short of it is, all these mobile CAD vendors would really need to do, in my opinion, would be to enable support for VAS or LDAP. These terms are familiar to you. Just understand that if they just enable support for a connection to one of these other systems, it would be easier to implement. Since that's not really possible right now, and we're all kind of fighting the clock on becoming compliant, and some of us have already passed that point of being compliant, or when we were supposed to be compliant, we're trying to implement solutions, or you're trying to implement solutions, so you can meet the requirement. So what we're really doing in these scenarios, the ones that have been approved so far, is using advanced authentication to, at the point of connecting to the environment for that transport, that VPN, if you will, the NetMotion, the Cisco VPNs, insert vendor of choice there. Just however you're establishing your connection from your MDT out in the field to your environment, so that once it's established, the mobile CAD will have a transport for running that query. So what you have to do, the short of it is, you have to demonstrate that your officers in the field are in a group of users on your NetMotion server, your VPN concentrator, your firewall, whatever you're terminating your VPNs with. That group of users is required, technically and by policy, to leverage advanced authentication. So when a user that's in this group, all your officers, launch their VPN connection, they're prompted for their advanced authentication method. Once they've done that and it's been successful and it's been passed through to a back-end server that confirms that they are who they are based on this other factor, they're allowed through, the traffic will pass that will enable that successful query. That's really what we've done. That's what's been put forward and what's been approved at the state and federal level as a deviation for advanced authentication. So a couple things to consider. When you're choosing a vendor for your advanced authentication, like everybody said, the FBI is not endorsing anybody. There's probably a dozen or more different solutions out there that will all meet the requirement. But what you want to make sure is that it's something that's not necessarily a closed thing. You can't extend for other purposes. So you're looking for something like LDAP or radius support so that you can take this system and continue to use it as things change. And things will change, they're changing right now.
Couple of comments on that real quickly, and I know Stratton's got a question, and some other questions are out there. I don't know what the net motion solution where's Greg? Way in the back. Greg was telling me that there's a net motion solution where there's a card that you slide in to the device. Is that what you're sliding into, Greg?
Yeah, basically what they demonstrated to me was you have a smart card, you put it in, put your password in, and then from that point on, it automatically launches mobile CAD, any website that you use regularly. It'll automatically log you into that system, but just using that single sign.
So Brian made a good comment earlier, I can let him speak for himself, but you have to be careful that it's not caching credentials, because if it's caching, that may not, yeah, cache credentials are specifically said no against in the policy. So I think single sign-on is a little bit open to interpretation still, but it looks like that kind of single sign-on is not allowed right now.
So before you buy a solution, I would definitely run that scenario by Brian at DOJ just to get his feedback. Everything else that we talked about, so many of you are using NetMotion, I feel like we wouldn't be doing you justice if we didn't say this. The way that NetMotion is set up right now, if you are going to put in an advanced authentication requirement onto your NetMotion connection, tell me if I'm wrong, guys, if this has changed, you're going to force everyone that's using NetMotion to also use AA. So the only other solution is to buy another NetMotion server and segregate your traffic, those who don't require AA and those who do. And I know I just probably opened a huge wormhole that I'm way out of my technical skill set, but Randy had his hand up, which means that I said something wrong. Right? Okay, hold on. Greg's running over there.
I was going to say, you can potentially use one NetMotion server and have a group of users that would be required to have authentication, and then the group of users pass through that aren't in that requirement, they would go through without a second factor. You can actually do that with both factor in NetMotion. They have a pass through.
Okay.
I just want to throw that out there, because I know that's been a concern for some people.
Right.
Is that you're going to have to add a second NetMotion server, but you can actually have users that fall through if they're not in your room.
If y'all don't know what he's talking about, that's Randy Kress from Rowan County. His email is kressrj@rowancounty.nc.gov. Did I get it right? Yes. He's the best consultant that no money can buy. Okay, Stratton.
So when you were describing the scenarios about the advanced authentication, you were describing what sounded like online or real-time connected. You talked about radius and LDAP and those kinds of things. And you said it was required for the transport back to some central server. What about those situations where the user is offline or in a disconnected mode and still logging in or interacting with their application, the data that's local on that machine? Is there no requirement for advanced authentication there? I just want to make sure I understand the scope of this is only in a connected mode for the transport from the remote device back to some central location.
I don't know.
The solution you described won't work in a disconnected.
No, I know that we have argued with the FBI about that, at least Ray and I have, and I think Josh too. I think I remember an email chain about that specific thing, because they don't say that it's data at rest versus data in transit. I mean, they don't make that distinction that you're online or offline in the policy. The way that they talk about it is if it's CJI, you have to put in AA. So if you, and this is what I said to these gentlemen up here, if you had a system that stored locally CJI, which some of them do, then you have to have AA in place if it's storing locally to the device. So I'm not sure.
That's something we'll need clarification on, because I know some of the solutions, at least the ones our agency was looking at, definitely allow the user to log into an application and access that data and information locally.
So they're accessing CJI locally
Yes.
without AA?
So there may have been a case where they've done some query to pull down data, but they're
your new job, my friend, go for it.
Well, I'm not in clarification.
Get some clarification on from the FBI on that. This is what it sounds like. I'm gonna be watching this video 15 times over to figure out what kind of clarifications we're asking for. You have something, Josh? Come on up.
I can't remember which agency it was. This question is very familiar to me. I want to say it was Foresight, or was it Sanity or something. The question had been posed about, operating an offline environment that you're describing. And I don't know if they sent a scenario to us for offline scenario or not.
It was at the Nickel Season Conference. I know it was Wednesday. Foresight. It was Foresight County. I remember the conversation now.
Yeah, I mean, and like Shannon said, the FBI doesn't make a distinction when it's from a policy standpoint, whether it's real time or if someone's been stolen with a device. I mean, just says for this information. But yeah, Brian, he and I will head back and call and see if we can get clarification. Yeah, that's right, but that still stands true, but, if I have logged in at some point, I hit my server, I pulled some data down, and I didn't get a chance to look at it right away. I'm now, in the salad board in the jail, offline, and now I'm, doing that, I can think of something like that. But, yeah, we'll have to ask about it.
I found the email chain. I just don't think I ever got an answer. Josh, or CD.
State at rest.
So some of your best resources are right here in this room, up here, table, Davidson County, Rowan County, City of Jacksonville, Hanover County, City of Wilmington. They're going through this, they've been through this, and they've got approval on their scenarios, and they have different perspective. And so I would encourage you to continue to leverage the expertise of listserv and throw those questions out there so that someone else who may have experience, exactly what you're going through or somewhere, in the ballpark, perhaps point you in the right direction.
Another question for you, Ray.
Hi. Quick question about cash credentials brings it to mind. Being in the western end of the state, a lot of our officers driving down the highway lose their connection, their air card drops, they get the connection back 300, 400 yards down the road, 2 minutes, 10 minutes later. What is the requirement for their session to resume? Are they required to re-enter do the full 2FA transaction all over again? That's probably something actually says how long. I would think at the shortest, we could call a session time out.
You say that again, Brian?
I would think at the shortest, you could call a session time out of 30 minutes. As long as we're offline for all of them.
But if they're moving down the highway, isn't there a session log out of 30 minutes for officer safety? Isn't that the policy piece we got rid of?
I'm sure you have them.
So while we're looking for that, something to answer that, let me give you a couple of things to consider while you're pursuing or evaluating advanced authentication solutions. So right now, what we're seeing out there is some of the vendors are providing risk-based authentication for SSL VPN solutions. I don't know who's familiar with that term, but it can be a more lightweight way to connect to the agency. Cisco provides one, it's pretty robust, Juniper and Checkpoint and so on and so forth. So previous, a year and a half ago, you had to have some form of advanced authentication that required you to carry something or a certificate or something like that. And why do we care about this? Well, the SSL VPN solutions are kind of becoming the de facto standard as the provider is trying to move away from IPsec for a number of reasons. So kind of in the same region of that question, you can also do things like NetMotion, as in persistence and kind of emulating a connection when you lose a connection so that you don't have drop sessions when you finally reconnect and come back in the range. When you're evaluating advanced authentication vendors, you want to make sure that whatever solution you're considering, it supports multiple standards. And you want to make sure that what they're selling you or proposing to you is going to meet your goals, not just today, but if you're thinking about going that route, from 6 months to 24 months from now, that whatever you're going to invest in is going to be able to provide you use down the road. So you want to make sure that whatever solution you're getting kind of works with what you have, and that you're not just getting something just to meet the requirement. And again, if you're looking for an open standard or support for something like Radius and or LDAP, it should support both, in my opinion, but that's another story.
Just for the answer to the question from the western part of the state, I think I found the answer, although maybe tell me I'm wrong. There is an appendix to the CJIS policy that there were two documents that were in addition to the policy. One is the mobile appendix, the other was the cloud computing guidance. And under 1.5.5 session lock, it says, due to the portable nature of mobile devices, the session lock limit may be excessive in the mobile environment for certain device functions and insufficient for others based on intended device usage. The agencies should examine the minimum lock time practical for all mobile devices based on their employment scenario and ease for which the user can manually lock and unlock the device. So I think that leaves the discretion up to the agency in that situation. Does that work for y'all? They wrote it on me, so. Yeah, good sense. Yes, that is their appendix. They published it, I believe, in November.
That was about the session locks, but he was talking about the VPN connection drops.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood what you were talking about.
So as the mobile unit drives out of the connection area and the connection to visual MCT drops, what kind of authentication must reoccur, and how often does that happen for our officers?
Right. Question, but I think in the case of a mobile terminal, we assume it's the same thing. I don't have to lock out the session, and I also don't have to re-authenticate.
So you mean if you authenticate at the beginning, and then it drops, and then it reestablishes the connection without you re-logging in, that's okay? I mean, I don't think the FBI's intent is to make officers' lives be more at risk while they're driving down the road trying to do their job. That doesn't make sense to me. So
they're not trying to make it harder than anywhere else.
right. So we're going to get clarification on Stratton's question about offline. Other questions? There were lots of hands up. Terry's got one up here. Poor Grady, the guy with the one arm was having to do all the work.
I need the extra. My question is, if you have a shared drive in your network that has CJI information in it, and you have a user who is accessing from a personal device using Citrix, do they have to access that information? Do they have to do advanced authentication on that personal device?
Where are they accessing it from?
They're accessing on a shared drive that's inside our network.
But are they in a secure location or are they somewhere else?
They're remote. It could be. Thanks.
Just what you want to hear. Other AA questions? Surely we didn't answer all the questions you had. Who's tired?
Yeah, on that note, that was a good question, and I think, I don't know if Josh or Brian did, another discussion. The question had come up kind of around those lines, but taking that Citrix or a virtual desktop being, since technically, from a technical standpoint, the data is not really leaving the data center, can we kind of use that as the justification for not having advanced authentication? And I think the guidance was that it doesn't really matter the fact that it's virtual. You're accessing it from that physically, the non-secure location, so therefore the advanced authentication is required. I think that's wherever the request originates is what was determined.
Okay, I realized one that I forgot was Stanley County. I know for a fact, because I've got it in my file, that these jurisdictions have had an approval, including Stanley County. Did I miss anybody in the audience that has submitted and had an approval? So New Hanover County is in the audience. Can you tell us roughly what you're going to spend to do AA? Now, New Hanover County is very large, but I think it would be useful for folks to have sort of a frame of reference.
It's growing daily, to be honest. And we have some questions around that scenario with our municipalities, but you're upwards of $100,000.
So upwards of $100,000 for New Hanover County, but they're also supporting their municipalities.
Which is why it's grown.
Right.
Because we didn't account for that in our scenarios and how we're going to handle that.
How many users is that?
250 for the shared side, and we're looking at, if we add the municipalities, probably close to another 100 devices.
So 350 devices. Joel, do you know what it's going to cost you?
Yes.
I feel like this is a good thing for you guys to know, since if you don't prepare for this budget cycle, you at least have to get it in next budget cycle, right?
We actually started some of this about 3 years ago with the tokens. In all, we'll probably have invested about $85,000 just for AA.
How many?
Anybody else have numbers that are
We have 90.
90 officers?
That's right.
I'm drawing from the back of the recesses of my brain, but my gut tells me, and maybe Chris Creek should have better than I do, but I think Holly Springs is going to spend about $35,000, maybe a little less than that for theirs. Yeah, he's going to email the boss.
I'm figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, so jurisdiction size is going to make a difference, but you are talking about something that you need to be prepared for in your budgets.
Holly Springs is spending out $4,000 in software and, how many readers they have to have in hardware. So they'll probably spend a couple thousand on top of that in hardware.
But that's not their net motion server they just bought, right?
No.
That was another $6,000 for the net motion server.
I take that back. Holly Springs went off on their own NetMotion server, and they're going to use the RSA solution, which is separate aside from the rest of the county. So I don't know what they're going to spend on it. Taking Holly Springs out of the scenario, the Wake County system AA will probably cost about $119,000 to $122,000 altogether between software license and any hardware. If they don't have existing fingerprint readers, and they have to buy those, then probably about $120,000.
And what solution are you guys looking at, Chris?
We're looking at digital persona,
That's right.
and they offer the you can use tokens, fingerprint, the different, they have a lot of different options.
Anybody else have numbers that they want to throw out here? Wake County, how many users, Chris? 1,400 users in Wake County. Todd?
I was just going to say, I'm encouraged, but we got about 65 mobile units out there. We'll probably spend under 10 grand on the software and the tokens. The VPN product, we use a private network between us and Verizon, so that was already in place. So there's not much more cost other than that software and proximity readers.
1,400 mobile units. Okay, what Chris said was 1,400 local users, or local mobile units, but then when you add in the other pieces of the puzzle, that's probably about 2,000 users for that price. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's right.
That was some serious hearing back there for me to do. Todd, do you know how much you're going to spend roughly?
We have about 235 law enforcement.
235 law enforcement in Gaston County.
And probably $85,000 for the motion fees, and then another $30,000 for the interest fees.
So he's looking at 105,000, it sounds like roughly, or 115,000, I can't do math today, 115,000 for 235 users. The reason I'm pointing this out is I just want to make sure that because of the extension, we don't know, I mean, there could be another extension, there's no guarantees about extensions, right? But you definitely want to prepare for your budget process this coming year so that you don't get caught unaware about this, because that was what created the stress around the situation this year, is that people didn't budget for it. More questions on AA before we keep rolling? Yes. Good question, and actually I think it's going to be Terry that has to answer because it's not me that can answer the question for Terry. So the question from the front was, for the agency that's using personally owned devices with Citrix clients running on them to access the network, whatever VPN, how do you enforce policy around antivirus, et cetera, being up to date on that device?
I mean, I think by the nature of Citrix, you're not enforcing anything on that device. The policies are enforced in your network. I mean, they're really getting a snapshot of your network. They're not entering into your network. It's just a snapshot.
Can they save CJI to the local device from the Citrix environment?
No. We have those policies turned on. I mean, we're not allowing them to take information out of our network. It's just to be able to view it. Most people use it. Most people use their mobile device right now for email. But we are testing Citrix for the different applications, and I see more of if an officer has a report that has CJIS information in it, and he wants a superior to look at it, and they've got their mobile device at home, I can see them looking at that information from their iPad.
And we had a nice question that somebody came up and brought actually their software up to the front of the room earlier. I can't remember who it was. They were using Spellman, I believe, and they showed us actually what the RMS system looked like, and there's an FBI number in there, and the question was, if this is the only thing that we have in this system that is CJI, do we still have to do AA? And Josh's answer was, yes. If that FBI number is in there, the answer is yes. Now, I don't know if CJIS has FBI numbers in there or not, but that might complicate the situation for them. I thought it did. That monkey wrench out there.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, this is something else in North Carolina they want us to think about. You have an FBI number, you don't have a name or anything else associated with it. What good does it really do at the end of the day? The APB is taking a look at the fact whether things such as the FBI number or ORI or anything that seeks to provide that doesn't have any other identifying type of information in it. Should that be included the same protections under the city security policy? It's up for debate right now. I don't know whether which way they're going to go. For right now, as it stands, just the FBI number is included that same protection.
I have a question going back to the Citrix environment. If you're not mobilely managing that device, how can you stop somebody from doing like a screen print or a screen capture of the device with CJIS information on it?
You can't, right?
So then you've got a problem.
Snapchat has proven that. Right? If you don't know about Snapchat, it's because you're young teenagers. But it's definitely proven that same concept.
You could prove like a data loss prevention solution, RSA, possible.
Would it know that it took a picture
Gotcha.
of the system? I mean, right, that's the concern, is that I can do a print, a quick picture of whatever comes across my screen. Right. And we're going to get into that a little bit, I think, as we go through. Were there other questions around this? There might be more questions if we drill in. Sure.
Start. I possibly don't have all of the enforcements on that particular device to actually get there.
That mobile device appendix does have personally owned guidance. If I remember correctly, I can see it before, but that would probably waste everybody's time. But I'll find it and point it out. There are some guidance elements, which, I mean, it's clear that personally owned devices can only be used if you have documentation, if you have policies and procedures to control those personally owned devices, if they're used for CJI. That's really clear, and you can't use them for optics in the state of North Carolina. Other states do allow it. Okay, so now we're going to get in way over my head, and I'm going to let Ray and Brian start talking about Section 10, or Policy Area 10, which is around systems of communications protection and information integrity. Boundary protection, encryption, intrusion detection, voice over IP, there's all sorts of pieces in here. I tried to write some questions just to prime the audience, and we'll see how well I did. There were questions that have come to me over the last few months, and most of you are sitting in the room that wrote these questions with us. So if you will add to this, I think it would be great. But the first question that we've heard a lot is, can MDTs be virtualized? And if so, is AA required for the MDT to connect to the network, or since it's virtualized? Okay, answer it again.
So if this is,
I know, this is not the best setup to look at that.
so if we're talking about a Citrix-like solution or a virtual desktop that you're accessing from an MDT, the guidance has been that, yes, advanced authentication is still required.
I think the thing to remember about AA in general is that it doesn't matter the method of inquiry. It really resides on where is that request for this information coming from. Is it coming from an area that is physically secure, yes or no? If it is fantastic. There's other things in there. However, if I have a regular MDT and I make a request from an unsecure location, or whether or not I have a virtualized MDT and I'm making a request from an unsecure location, AA is still required. There's a decision tree in the CJIS policy, I believe it's in section 510, the back of it, that basically helps you understand, is AA required? And, the trigger member AA, whether or not it's required, where physically is that request coming from? Can you guarantee that request is coming from a physically secure location? If you cannot, you must assume that, no, it's not coming from a physically secure location. So if it's not, or it's unintelligible, you're going to require it. If it is coming from a physically secure location, and the proper technical security controls that they're going to discuss are in place, then AA is not required. And I talked about this earlier with somebody, typical setup, like a dispatch center, it's physically secure by the FBI definition of the policy. The technical security controls are in place. AA is not required. Now, you may be more welcome to implement if you so choose, but it's not required.
Yeah, this is the start of the decision tree. It goes on and on. So this is the whole document. There's a diagram somewhere. It's the same thing.
As you can see down at the bottom, the request number 2, it came from a physically secure location, yes. Are the required technical security controls being implemented in this location at 4 active controllers? Yes. It's waived, but if the answer to either of those questions is no, then the AA is required. So really, it's determined, the biggest thing is where is that coming from physically? Is it in a locked building somewhere, or is it your offshore out there on the side of the street?
And to head off in the past, for the technologists, you could usually a very strong argument to say, well, it's virtual. The request is actually happening local to the data center, which is physically secure. But that whole scenario was put forward, and the ruling was, just as Josh said, if you're not in a physically secure location, then A is required.
So a couple of other questions that I teed up, that we've been asked, is whether CAD RMS can be virtualized, and if so, do you have to have separate physical servers, or separate hypervisors? Who wants to go?
All right, so we should be able to virtualize those. The servers only comes into place, I guess, when it's internet facing also. So it does say that you can't have internet facing servers located on the same physical device as a server that holds CJIS data.
Did you guys hear that? You cannot have internet-facing servers on the same device, is that what you said, as same physical device as something that is holding CJIS or CJI.
This is another area that's going to be kind of a pain point for some organizations, because you may have or are considering investing in, a huge virtualized infrastructure with devotion and, fault tolerance.
They probably can't hear you.
So this may be a pain point for some of you, because you either have already or considering investing in a huge virtualized environment that provides you self-healing and fault tolerance and so on and so forth, but may also require you to commingle guests on the same host, which it's clear that that's prohibited. Something to consider.
And then the next question was, what separation is required for VMs on the same physical servers? There's a lot of questions around virtualization.
Yeah, there's an appendix that addresses all of that, appendix G. Appendix G. Trying to check on the tax project.
And then I had a question for the SBI that came from someone, whether Omnix can be run across a virtualized MDT. They're passing the buck up here. Okay, so the answer was if it's an agency-owned MDT and an agency-owned virtualization, then yes, you can run Omnix.
HTML laptop that you have to go back to and install your own virtualization on them.
Okay. That was clear as mud.
Could you repeat that?
I know. I still don't understand. Say it like loud.
If it's an agency-owned MDT and the agency has installed the virtualization software and is managing the virtualization software, then the answer is yes. If you happen to have administrative access to it and you decide to install your own virtualization so you can run Windows 8 on your Windows 7 machine, then the answer to that would be no.
So they can run Omnix on MDTs now?
Question. And really, really at the end of the day, we have not set a policy on that. And mainly because, yeah, I know, the virtualization really has come to a head here the past few years, obviously, and people are starting that route to save resources. One thing you do have to be mindful of if you're going to virtualize any device that comes into Windows is that the whole purpose of virtualization is sharing resources. You could potentially be sharing an OI and TID. Problem with that is if Lynn sees one TID logged in, and another request comes in to open another terminal with the same OI and TID, it's going to kick off the one that's already logged in and move it partially. I do know that we have a federal agency in the Charlotte area that is currently virtualizing
Josh, I'll speak to that real quick. Town of Kernersville, we did a pilot program with DMV4. We did virtualize on externals, but we did a one-to-one pool. So the machine that cranked up was for Terminal ID 1. If that shut down, Terminal ID 1 is available. Terminal ID 2 had its own pool, single PC pool. Terminal ID 3, we only have 4 consoles. So we didn't have a problem getting kicked off, but that's how we solved it. We had a one-to-one pool for the virtualization. We don't run that currently. Ran into another hiccup with DMV4. It's probably been solved with DMV5, but if you want to try that, you can try that.
And again, it's just reiterating what Brian mentioned, in that situation, if you've got users sitting at home and they're after hours clothing and they get the need to run some of these hackers for whatever reason, you do need to be aware. You cannot guarantee that their home is secure. Again, it's something these guys brought up and how you unfortunately technical security controls. And so is it possible? Yes. There are a lot of factors we have to consider before firing it up.
We did that only in a secure environment. In the police department itself, we didn't do it outside the department.
Were there questions on any of that, or are there any areas that I missed? Tell us on section 10, before we move on to others. Yep, sure. Yep, please. You need the mic. Or you can say.
We kind of skipped over media protection. We can cover that. We can kind of address that when we get to encryption. But I think that's something that's.
But no, I want you to walk through those things.
Oh, you think that's coming up?
No, that what you're doing now.
We have some content.
I don't know if I did, so you just start talking and I'll figure out over here what I did wrong, but I'm sure I did something wrong. This is what happens when you build your PowerPoint during lunch break. So I try to be responsive. Okay, you start talking and I'll find it.
Thank you. So policy area 10 covers a number of things related to communication protection and system integrity or information integrity. And so this covers just about everything from a technical standpoint: patch management, segmentation, access controls, which are covered to some extent in other policy areas. But this is really about how we're protecting the data itself and how it flows and how we're controlling access to it and monitoring it. So the first thing that's often overlooked is information flow enforcement. And so it's very clear in the policy that web traffic destined for the internet from the patrol car in the field, the officer, the MBT, as you see, if you will, is required to pass through some kind of filtering mechanism and not go direct. And what does this really speak to? Well, this speaks to a number of things: integrity, system integrity, malware, that kind of thing. We're looking, I believe, to protect or make sure that internet traffic is protected and that the individual devices don't become compromised. So that's something that's often overlooked. Then we move into boundary protection, and that I think we touched upon in the morning session, where we have a large network or we allow a lot of connections into our network, or our network's very flat, and we have different parts of the organization that have nothing to do with law enforcement, kind of commingled or reversing our environment where there is this sensitive data. So there's specific requirements about controlling access to this information, which you can do through using names and passwords in groups, group policy, active directory controls, and things like that. But it also talks about monitoring this access. So we kind of talked in the morning about logs. We were talking mostly about the logs in the system that actually process or create CJI. But we kind of overlooked that there's also a requirement for looking at the logs of the actual operating systems as well. So the MBTs, the servers that are necessary, server operating system, CAD server operating system, and so on and so forth. So establishing boundary protections is something that's good to do, but you also have to monitor activity that's going on in the environment. This could be done through IDS or security information so on and so forth. Are there any questions about boundary protection or information flow enforcement? Next, we get to encryption. When CJI is at rest outside the boundary of physically secured location. So many of us, I would imagine in every department there is some use of mobile media in the form of USB attached storage. Very often, very small form factor, thumb drives, flash drives, jump drives, whatever you want to call it. While these things are very convenient, they're very dangerous when it comes to breaches of data or unauthorized individuals gaining access to sensitive data. In this case, we're talking about CJI specifically. So there's a specific requirement for encrypting data at rest. If you're using these thumb drives, and I know they're in use, and there's a valid reason to use them. They're being used for DA packages and so on and so forth, or storing files. You really should be considering some sort of encryption solution to protect the data, because it's very likely that at some point in time, if you have 20 officers using thumb drives or flash drives in the course of their daily routine, that someone is going to lose one. So an encryption solution is warranted here, and there's a number of them out there, and it's very likely that whatever you're using for your endpoint solution right now already has that available. You just have to license the module or enable the module or just configure the module. So that's something to be considered. Again, as with anything with this policy, any encryption standard you use, or any encryption solution you use, I should say, has to meet the BIPS 140-2 standard, which is the Federal Information Processing Standard 140-2. It's just a standard. If you're not sure, all you have to do is check with your solution provider, your vendor, McAfee, Symantec, and so on and so forth, Sophos, Checkpoint, and see, confirm that whatever you're using does meet this standard. The next point is improved detection tools and techniques. It's very clear that the FDA wants the traffic in and out of this environment to be monitored. And I think someone brought up a point earlier, I think it was Josh or Brian, that said that, if you reduce your footprint, it's much easier to control this as opposed to having just a complete flat network. And that's not possible for every organization for a number of factors. But if you can reduce your footprint, it's much easier to monitor the activity that occurs in that environment or to and from that environment, ingress and egress. There is a requirement for monitoring what's going on, and that all ties back into your daily log review, your log review, which you maintain for 365 days or free or depending. So it's something that has to be tied back in. We've kind of touched upon partitioning and virtualization. It's certainly allowed. Virtualization is not prohibited. There's just some things you have to consider, like whether or not your hypervisor also houses systems that are internet-facing or public-facing. That is pretty good. That's not allowed. Patch management. This could be a tough one. These MDTs, they're not connected to the network long enough for large updates to be pushed. It's very difficult to keep them consistent. And if you think about this, it all ties back into defense in depth. There's a reason why you don't want these systems going direct to websites, so that the traffic can be monitored and filtered, not to prohibit somebody from necessarily going somewhere, but to make sure that where they're going isn't something that's full of malware and it's going to compromise the system. I think everybody understands it's difficult to keep these systems up to date because it's difficult to push large updates through an in-motion connection, and so on and so forth. So having a patch management strategy that addresses this and keeps the system as up to date as you can, and I would say that critical security updates apply within 30 or 60 days. I don't know if there's a specific recommendation that Brian or Josh would have, but you want to have something that you can monitor and track and be able to demonstrate when the auditors show up that yes, we know how many systems we have, we know what the status of their updates are, and this is our process and our methodology. And we're able to track this. And we know when somebody's way up in compliance, we can bring them in, have plugged into the wire for 30 minutes or so, and become complete and updated and compliant. keep in mind that WSUS, while a great system, for those of you that know what that is, it's a Microsoft provided update system, doesn't cover the non-Microsoft updates. And I'm sure we all saw in the news recently, an issue with Java, which was released, the federal government even got on the bandwagon and was announcing how bad it was. Of course, everybody was like 3 or 4 months behind when the vulnerability was actually published, but at least something's being done, and everybody, I think every citizen in America that follows CNN understands that there's an issue with Java. So it's things like this that you can't update with some systems like WSUS, so you have to have a plan for updating those. I'm not advocating that you got to buy some commercially built patch management solution, but that you have a way to update these systems that meet these critical updates with things that are full of holes and they could cause or lead to compromise or effective. I'll turn it over to Brian for the rest of the scope protection.
I don't think we can go through each section unless people have questions.
I'm right here.
Questions? Well, if you want to ask questions first.
Andy's got one.
I do have an AA question. I do have an AA question. We talked about removable media and we encrypt those. Can a piece of removable media like flash drive with a file on it that's necessary to log on be a personal item that a person authenticating presents as either a risk-based authentication method or as the second token of?
Yeah, you can have a USB token.
Okay, so basically, a standard USB flash drive with a file on it that's required for log on would be.
But remember that it has to go back to the back-end system.
That's right, so back-end system's log on script looks for the USB key.
And it needs to be personally identifiable to that person.
For that specific one,
So
it'll
you
come
can't
back
have-
to file,
You can't have one file with agency wide.
a file per individual, and then that fits.
Because you have to have some way to be able to cut their access off by that. So you have to have the back-end system, and you say, okay, this file is no longer valid.
Yep. So that would fit if you had to implement to do that?
Yeah, that'd be USB token.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Oh, one right there. Next, I get to the test for screen. I'll let Matt be trained.
Yeah, back on A, you said earlier that the device can't cache credentials for the, whatever, certificate or smart card. Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose? If I gotta have a smart card in my laptop, and I walk away from the car, and I have to leave that smart card in there, doesn't that defeat the purpose?
Well, you don't have to leave the smart card in there. The credentials are what's being sent to the back-end server. So the back-end server is like constantly checking. You log in one time and it checks right in. So you can take the card back out at that point. Usually something you just swipe or it's a contact card that you just touch to a terminal. But it's usually not something that checks in and you can fit it. And then in the case of
Well, I'm saying in cases where every time you try to access something, it checks that smart card.
and in the case of NDT, then that's a little bit because it's got a little secure location violation right now.
Okay.
Brady, do you have something to add to that?
So it depends on how you've got to implement it. Like Ryan said, the way we describe the deviation for advanced authentication of the scenarios that have been approved have been with the transport, with the VPN. And it's done just at that initial VPN establishment. So if you were just using the smart card as an example, if you were to use a smart card as your advanced authentication mechanism when you establish a VPN, you wouldn't necessarily need to leave that smart card attached once the VPN was established. It would just be up and running, and every access would just ride that same transport. Now, it may be implemented in a different manner or have been presented to you in a different manner with your system, where you would actually need that for every access attempt. And then in that case, obviously, you would need it. But this is one of those things we'd have to kind of know a little more detail on, I think, to give you a better answer.
I have a question out here.
Oh, sorry, I saw you very well.
In reference to CJIS, do they have to have
Andy, you want to stand up and answer that? We've been, in our discussions with CJ Leeds about, you know, potentially getting DCI and blend information over to them. They understand that there is in fact a need for advanced authentication at some point. Now, it's not required now because they're not receiving any type of CJIS information from us. But
They do have the FBI.
Yeah, they've got the FBI number, just
right.
like Spelman does.
They do, they're not getting it from us, they're getting it from a different data source. However, fear factor is present, they are aware of that, and without speaking for them, I can tell you they are in fact exploring and they're searching for a method for AI.
So they don't have to have it right now.
Technically, by policy, they should, and they understand that, but they're working towards that right now.
Okay, my issue with that, well, not an issue, but if I have officers that go to the internet and connect to CJ Leeds and get that information, and then they email it to somebody else or whatever because they have mobile apps, then is my department going to be in trouble?
Well, you have to look at the data that they're sending. First of all, you have to look at the data they're extracting from CJ Leeds. You know, are they extracting something that would fall into the CJIS security policy? You know, if they're extracting, if they're running some information on a particular individual, and just say they copy the driver's license number, name, date of birth, and address out of there, and then zip that across, you know, an email server somewhere, CJIS policy doesn't apply to that. Now, if they're copying the FBI number or some other data in the future, once we start feeding that information to them, this does come into play. And you know, you would have to set some local policy, you know, for whoever your users are at your agency, as far as, you know, here's what you can, here's what you can't. Dan, I don't know if y'all have even gotten that far as even thinking about policy, about information usage and that sort of.
So it's important to remember that when you're training for CJD, that you can only pass information from CJD to other authorized individuals. So you can't distribute that information to folks outside the criminal justice community, right? So they shouldn't be giving that out to anyone else to start out with. Now, as far as the FBI number, that is, we know that that's in our system right now. We will either mask that or get we're working very hard towards an AA solution. Once we get that, then we wouldn't have to mask the FBI number. Everybody says they want us to keep that, and we want to protect that and keep that in our system. As Josh said, we're working with the SBI and with DOJ on this DCI service, with that interface, and that would require, we can't wait until September 14th. We would have to have that right now. If we were to implement it next week, we would have to have it next week. Does that help?
Just for reference, I pulled up the definition of CJI that's actually in the standards. Is that what you're going to ask me?
And my question is more for CJ Leeds. If you're looking at an AA solution that is not risk-based, but would be token or some type of device that we would have the officers or people or CJ Leeds accessible, when is that time frame? Could that be shared, or is it being thought of that those users accessing CJ Leeds, that same token is being used by the agencies for their own solutions? And what is the feasibility of that?
Well, that would certainly be our goal, if we could come up with a solution that could be used by the law enforcement agencies, you know, for things other than CJD. Because you don't want to have I got to use this token for CJD, and I got to use this token for my RMF. So, you know, we've been talking to, we had a discussion with IPS, for example, on how we might be able to do it with NCID. And so that is being explored, and there's an RFI in progress right now, and we're meeting on that on Monday. But yeah, that will be the goal, would be to have one device that's all on.
I have a question on logging. Are you talking about domain authentication system logs or just application logs?
Yeah, so, again, we're only talking about the criminal justice data, so it doesn't matter who logs into your domain if they're not accessing the criminal justice data. So for purposes of this discussion, we're only talking about application of logs. Or if you're using the VPN as a way to access it, VPN of logging, but only things that actually apply to criminal justice.
Any last questions before we take a quick break? Oh, yeah, right. And then we're gonna take a break, I promise. I know you're gonna sit for a while.
Just a quick question on encryption. Talk about thumb drives, but is the hard drive encryption not required as well?
On what?
The mobiles.
On a mobile that's within a police vehicle?
Well, don't use
let's assume
that.
it's not a
You have to
secure
do all the
location.
caveats.
It's not going to be a secure location at least by next year, so at that point at least, does that have to be encrypted?
I would say yes, I'm not sure exactly what the policies are, but I have to check things.
That's for any questions that need to be answered right this second? Yes? Oh, okay. Let's take a break for 15 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll wrap up with the last little things. I think we're going to be out of here at 3:30. The thing is heavy. Some of you are asking about the resource page that I keep referencing, and I know I am guilty of the worst crime possible, which is to send you so much information that you actually don't read it. Right? And that's what has probably happened, is that I sent so much information so many times that you probably missed this page down here at the bottom. So on the information that I sent out where you had an agenda and you had your parking pass and so many details, you probably didn't make it all the way down, and I apologize for not being more clear about that and sending another note. But the link to the page is right there on that email. I will then send it out to everybody again once I update it, so that you'll know that it's been updated again. If you just give me till like Monday when I've recovered from New Orleans and eating crawfish until I'm 400 pounds, that'll be good. So we're going to go on and keep talking a little bit more about some of the technical issues. I'm going to actually go back down there and open up my computer. We had a couple of clarifications and questions that people posed, so I'm going to let the panelists talk about those questions, and they might have some clarifications or questions that were raised for them that everybody needs to hear. The first question that came up, and they were posed to me, but I don't know the answer, so I just find out, is if you have officers that are assigned unique IDs, so the officer number, and then they have a password, and they use that for logging on to all their various devices, etc. When the officer leaves, the next officer gets assigned the former officer's ID, right? Like, I mean, the same way we rotate Social Security numbers. Is that an issue from a compliance standpoint? They would have a new password, but it would be the same ID. So that idea of unique ID is not truly unique. It's unique to current employees. Is that the right way to say it?
I don't think anything globally unique. It's unique at this point in time.
Yeah, so it's unique to current employees. It would not be unique for the rest of your life.
Yeah, the point is more that you can cut off one person's access if you need to, and then we can determine who was accessing the system.
Okay, perfect. Another question was their RMS, and I might have butchered this, so holler at me if I did. The RMS is housed on a server with NC links and other sort of internet-facing applications. Is that a violation of that commingled requirement? What was another one that was on there? Not NC links, others. P2P, that was it. I knew there was some other number of things. P2P? Okay, good. You don't know it either? Josh knows what it is. Is that a violation? Does it have CJI though, was the question? So you're feeding it into your RMS.
Let me ask you somewhat technical question about PDP. Is it almost, that information is not being stored anywhere? P2P application is basically running up to each individual RMS and making a real-time query? Is that correct? I don't know. I'll have to ask.
Shannon, I think the issue is with those is more that they're not really internet facing and that they reach out to specific internet servers. Like links goes to a specific address. Nothing about links comes into the network. So that may differentiate between actually being internet facing and just accessing the internet.
Yeah, the policy does specifically say web servers, as an example. So, yeah, I think the policy is meant to say that anything that's open to anyone from outside cannot be on the same server as the RMS server.
Which in this case it would not be. These are made to go to a specific server, not taking any other incoming traffic.
Correct.
Did everybody understand that? So you wouldn't want your RMS and your city or county website on the same device? Is that a fair statement? Yeah, okay. Or your e-commerce site or whatever. The next question was, we have a homegrown RMS that we've built and we input our own data. Do we have to have advanced authentication?
And it never grabs data from...
And it never grabs data from the FBI, right? That's where it gets tricky. So if there are FBI, so okay, they've caught y'all. That's what has happened. They have caught y'all in the trickiest conversation ever because you said that CJ Leeds was getting the FBI number from some source other than the FBI. And their statement is they're getting the FBI number from some source other than the FBI, so shouldn't it be the same? Did I just interpret that correctly? Okay.
Yeah, it's why I hit me over the head with that one during the break. I'm trying to figure and Danny, if you want to add something to this, I feel like you need to be up here. But CJ Leeds knows that they need advanced authentication now. They are in the same boat with the rest of you folks in this room that need it right now, should have it right now, don't meet the exceptions, and have to have it right this second. They're waiting, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're waiting on the state ITS request for information to come back and evaluations to occur to see where ITS is going to land. They want to see, if a solution that they pick is in fact compatible with NCID to make life a little bit easier for CJA users. But the fact of the matter is, they still need AA now. They are aware that they're working towards implementation, which is a lot of people are probably in the same boat. Is that okay?
So the issue is not that you query the FBI to get the data, is that you have data that originated from the FBI in your system. That's what forces AA. Did I interpret that right?
It's any data that comes from the FBI.
But that doesn't mean comes from. That means comes from, however you do it.
The FBI number is one thing that we can say was certainly originally sourced from the FBI.
So, to help some scenarios we're talking about, you got a secure location. They run state queries on the same machine, their numbers managed, folks. There is building RMS, whatever it is. At that moment, RMS is available, it's RMS, and it's available outside of secure locations, because it's in any office that where RMS is. So there's knowing that it's in a secure area where it was started and generated, but the moment that it's in RMS, it's available to the staff, to the rest of the RMS agencies that we share that data with.
Right, but again, you have to, again, other FBI data that we put in there. You know, if they're in a physical secure location and, you know, you've got proper controls technically on those devices, then A, it's not necessarily required on the devices. Because they're putting that in, and if they're, you know, they're making clear to make sure that, yes, I put the data correctly, which probably we were to do. Then A, it's not required in that situation just because of the physical location where that was established. Right. Right, I have put it in the RMS and I'm now making a query against that to make sure, double check my work before, you know, I move on to the next whatever I need to do.
Brian had one clarification. Somebody had mentioned that, I think it's OSSI, one of the systems that people are using, wipes the data, and if it wipes the data, you don't have to encrypt it. Is that right? Okay. And then the last one, which was a great question that there is not an answer to right now, is what if you're using LPR, did I get that acronym right? I don't know, they threw so many acronyms up here, it was like an IT conference on steroids, because VCs and VRs and LPRs, but that's license plate reader, you're new. And apparently it goes and queries NCIC at some level, and so there is no guidance from the FBI on that, from what Josh knows, so he's going to go back and ask the FBI about it. Because theoretically, it should have AA.
But you're getting a hot file on your server that's been downloaded. It shouldn't be connecting to.
The way we explain it with the real-time query, some of it will come back and it's FTP downloaded. It just depends on whoever you got. You know, so it could be a difference based on the numbers.
And he did say it was real time. He said it goes out and it queries, and it hits something in Florida, and it hits the NCIC, and then it comes back. Other questions around this before we move on? So I think this is the last section I think we said this was the last section we had to cover. This would get really complicated most likely, but these were some common things that came up out of section 5 around access, and they were wireless and cellular and Bluetooth. And so in terms of wireless access, the questions that we've heard a lot, and actually Ray brought this first question up earlier today, was how do you treat mobile devices that are tethered? Brian? Yeah, or Ray can know a scenario.
So there's several scenarios here. It's a mobile hotspot as in Wi-Fi, or using Wi-Fi technology, or I think that's easier to understand as opposed to one that's tethered via a USB cable that's attached to your TV.
So we're using the phone for internet access?
Correct. But it's attached via cable, it's not the Wi-Fi hotspot, which I don't know if it's really, there are some differences there. I don't know how many.
Okay. I think at that point you have to secure the transport. It is within the car, so I don't need AA right now, unless it's been in the last couple of years. About 5. That was. But I mean, you're just using it for a modem basically. So you have to run VPN over in order to get anything else.
Another question that we hear quite often is around segmentation requirements for city Wi-Fi, whether or not there's probably a couple of levels of this conversation. Can they be using public Wi-Fi for accessing CJI, the officers, with the answer?
Sure, you can use any kind of Wi-Fi for accessing it, as long as you're also using it.
As long as you're also using AA, you can use public Wi-Fi. And then, Ray, you're going to have to describe that scenario about one single server with moving data, because I'm trying to write it down.
Okay, so just backing up once again onto the requirements for a city Wi-Fi deployment. This touches upon a number of areas. If it's going to be a Wi-Fi deployment that is interwoven with your wired infrastructure and the wired side of your city or county network or your local network. There's some segmentation requirements. There's requirements for either physically or virtually segmenting the wired and the wireless side. And I think this poses a lot of challenges for a lot of organizations that are considering it. And if not done properly, it can open a lot of holes in the environment and add some requirements to how you connect. I think the biggest, most of you are already leveraging some kind of mobile VPN, NetMotion, or the VPN technology, and I think you kind of stay, kind of along those lines, regardless of the Wi-Fi, whether it's internal or external. You'll buy yourself a lot. That's not to say that you have to. All right. Yeah, you might be. Brian might say.
So, yeah, I think if you're coming from a wireless network, then you certainly can't guarantee that that's coming from inside a secure location, so AA requires that. Whether that's public Wi-Fi or own Wi-Fi.
Another scenario that's pretty common, we're not talking about publicly available virtual systems here. That's a whole other discussion. We continue to have that. But this one specifically is you have, let's just say you have a SQL server. You have a single server in your environment, and enterprise license. You've got a lot of resources. It's robust. You have multiple instances for all the different things you do in your organization, law enforcement or otherwise. So you have one instance that is specific to your law enforcement, your CAD or something, and you're storing CJI in there. And this is the same SQL server, but it's a different instance. So a question that commonly gets asked is what, if any, controls are required, and what would be considered appropriate controls? An example would be, would AD controls be adequate enough? Groups, the stuff that's native to the systems that are in use in most environments. Would that be adequate enough to keep the segmentation from one instance of SQL to another, even though it's all on one logical or physical subset of servers?
I'll find out one real good answer to that. Obviously, whoever has the admin passwords has to sign in and be following procedure policies. As far as people who would just access the data on the other servers as part of their job and don't have admin access, then that's fine. You can virtualize that all. There's no problem with that.
So it would be safe to say, so it would be accurate to say that the controls that are native to Active Directory or the applications would be adequate enough segmentation for internal to the city or county government to provide the segmentation required between one instance and another. In other words, another way to frame that question would be, it's not necessary to have a completely separate SQL server for purposes of law enforcement. So, back to you, Shannon.
All right. Another question is around AA for cellular devices. What type of AA is required? Because it clearly says in the policy that if you're accessing CJI on cellular devices, you have to have AA. So I don't know if you have. If you don't have the answer, I do.
Go ahead.
I have it direct from the FBI that your simple 4-digit PIN that you put on your phone, your iPhone, is fine for them. I don't know what they consider it, but they approved a scenario with it, and I got it in writing. That's all that really matters. Right?
Okay, so if I understand your questioning right for the SQL server, how does that differ from the hypervisor instance that was brought up this morning, where you're requiring separate hypervisors for CJIS and non-CJIS data?
Right, it's not CJIS and non-CJIS data, it's web-facing and non-web-facing. So actually web-facing and CJIS data. So in this case, we're only talking about database servers. I'm making the assumption that you don't have database servers that you have a web server in the DMZ, and then it's accessing a database server in a protected zone, then you can have those database servers on the same physical device. But the web server and the database server have to be on two separate devices.
I just want to pull up where I saw that AA kind of piece. This was related to a phone factor solution, and this is straight from the FBI. It said that the policy needs to be instituted require that all personally owned cell phones, they were using, that's the way they described it for approval. To have that PIN or another unique form of identification to access the phone. They consider that sufficient.
Well, that was just like a response to the phone factor. So they're still using another second factor. They had to use the PIN in order to respond to the phone factor.
Yeah, the problem is you still have to, most of them don't require you to dial it in and answer it when an incoming call comes in, right? You just answer it. You dial it in, but I didn't bring that down. I just said, okay.
I think I do have to put a PIN there.
I'm the opposite of him. I don't ask for permission, I beg for forgiveness. All right, just pull up, last thing was around Bluetooth. Any questions or concerns around Bluetooth? I think the policy's pretty simple, right, Ray? You have to change the defaults and it needs to be PIN protected. It's definitely creating some challenges with Bluetooth printers.
That's correct. Pretty straightforward.
Other questions you guys have had?
I had someone ask me if they could get copies of the scenarios in a Word format rather than PDF format.
Was it an IT person?
Considering the room's full of them, I would say
Because I'm
that.
gonna spend my time fixing it to where I can just save it in a Word format. I'm thinking that y'all probably are savvy enough to do that. If it was submitted to me in Word format, then yes, we've submitted everything to the FBI and to Brian and Josh in PDF format because of the Visio documents that we've attached. And not everybody has Visio, so that's why I built it all into that. But if you're trying to copy it so that you can then replicate the exact format, is that why you're asking the question? If that's why you're asking the question, I have a handful of them that I have written. Ray and I actually wrote the first two scenarios in Word, so I'm happy to share those with you.
Yeah, if anybody wants mine, just shoot me an email and I'll email it to you.
I think I've got them in Word. I just don't have them all in Word, I don't think. Yes, Marie.
You spoke about earlier the importance of using the expertise and resources of the people here. Are you going to be publishing or disseminating a user list with emails or?
You're the second person that's asked that. I am happy to do that. What I can tell you is that the data we have about you is whatever you gave us. And so we have your first name, your last name, your title, your jurisdiction, your email address, and your telephone number. I can't promise you that they're 100% accurate. Some people type in the wrong email addresses. We don't have a complete list of everybody that's here probably, because some of you might not have signed in. So what you would get is the list of registered attendees, not the list of all attendees, or actual attendees. But we will be putting out documentation on that same group list for the video files once they're uploaded. So a link to that, a link to the resource page that you've already seen in an email, but we'll update that resource page. And then my goal is to actually produce a report from this that will summarize some of the key elements. I know that the issue of thumb drives was a big one that we want to focus on. And I think there's a couple of things that came out that maybe were concerns or surprising or you hadn't thought of. I think the way it was framed was we gave answers to questions that they hadn't even thought of yet, which that to me is a great statement. But so I'll try to frame it in a way that is reasonable for everyone to use. I can't promise it'll be this next week, but I'll try because I have to watch the videos to get all of the items. And then we will put out, once Josh gets answers to the questions that were articulated to be sent up, we will put that out to this same group. Is that useful? Any other questions? Terry?
If we have a third-party vendor that has got all of it, you've got the letter of fulfillment and all that information, they're coming in remote, does that have to do with info authentication?
Okay, so the question was, if we have a third-party vendor who has got, we've got the letter of fulfillment, MOUs, everything is signed, and they're remoting into our system, and I'm presumably accessing CJI, right? Or incidentally accessing CJI, do they have to use advanced authentication?
I would say yes. But let me tell you just my rationale behind that, just my initial thought.
Y'all hear in the back? Okay.
I'll say yes initially, but I'll submit that as a follow-up question. But my initial thought is yes, and I'll tell you why. Yes, your vendors have been vetted and cleared at that point. They're gold, right? So, same thing can be said for any DCI operator. You know, DCI operators are required to be vetted and cleared before getting access to that information. For those of us in the room that are sworn, we take your sworn status as, we're going to fingerprint requirements. For those of us that are not sworn, you need to be fingerprinted tonight, right? But they are authorized by policy to do it, but they still have to, implement, they still have to use AA to get in. So I would view the vendor in the same light, that even though, yes, they have been vetted and cleared, they would still be required to do that. But I'll submit that and see if they have any input on it. I feel sure probably have a question, we're leaving one in, et cetera, but I'll try to word it as broadly as possible, see what kind of dialogue I can start.
So if they're monitoring the equipment, and we want to do a 24-hour monitoring, everything I read in the policy says that it's a temporary connection. In other words, they're on a temporary doing maintenance on the server, they're doing the hardware maintenance, and they have indirect access to the data that contains CJIS information. But we want to be able to do 24-hour monitoring so that we can be proactive to hardware failures.
In case you got something going south, you want to go ahead and head off the bat.
Be proactive to get it changed out. You notice you drive something to fail, get that drive out that you drive in before it actually fails.
The question, the statement from here was, in instances where you have a third-party vendor in a 24-hour monitoring, therefore accessing these systems to take a proactive approach, and again, I'll have to see, I'll put it in and see what it spits out.
Other questions? I'm writing everybody's emails down so you'll have them. Ray, okay. Secure. Yeah, I know, I'm gonna fix that just a second. I realize people can't read that. Should have done this before. These are everybody's email addresses. I will also put this out there on the resource page so that you'll have them, and they'll be hyperlinked that way. You don't have to write all this down right now if you don't want to. But again, if you will do us a favor, anytime you're submitting scenarios, it'd be awesome if you're willing to copy me on your scenarios so that I can keep adding to that database that we have for local agencies here in North Carolina. Do you guys keep a database of scenarios that you approve? Okay, so they have file folders as well, but a lot of times we want to make sure that everybody's getting the information in a timely way. So if you'll copy me, that'd be awesome, or maybe these guys will just shoot it back down to me, which is great too. And we can keep putting that information out there. Anything that we can do to help you guys, I hope you reach out to us and let us know. I love that we're done about half we can stick around for a little while and answer any questions you have that are individual questions. I might try to eavesdrop and just document those questions so that we have them for other people's purposes. But otherwise, thank you guys so much.
Hey, before everybody leaves, please give Dr. Shannon Tuss a big round of applause. She's been a